black people, you don't care about poor people because you want to cut our social programs. And Republicans are saying the exact opposite, just like a drug addict. If you keep giving a drug addict drugs, you know, the drug addict is going to keep going to the person who's giving them the drugs and thinking they're helping them because you're fixing me. But the other person is saying, no, I want you to be independent. I want you to be off drugs. You don't need the government. You don't need the drug. And so that's what the Republican Party has been saying historically. And even the abolitionists said the same thing. We don't want a government handout. We want to be equal. We want to have the same opportunity as everybody else. And so I thought that was very interesting. There was no flip. What happened was the voting trends changed. Black people started voting Democrat because they were following the money and they thought it was the best thing for them because actually, you know, who wants to work if you don't have to? If you pay a person to be poor, they're going to be poor. You know, if you're going to pay me to stay at home and not work, I'm going to stay at home and not work. That's what happened. And so these young mothers, they said, okay, if I can stay at home, you know, and with my kids, why would I go to work? And the Republicans said, no, we want you to go to work. We're going to put the provision back in there, but we're going to pay these small businesses, these daycare centers to take care of your children while you work. So they had a different method of attacking poverty, which I believe is more effective. And so that's where the voting trends have changed, not the party platform. So the old Republicans are not the new Democrats and all that stuff. That never happened. So that's just my 2 cents.
I think one of the biggest problems we have today in this country is perception. And the other underlying problem is education. And the children in our schools are being told one thing and not being told the facts. And it gets back to a lot when we were talking here about the civil rights movement. I remember growing up and going through that whole period in time and being told in the perception of how great the Great Society programs were and how they were going to benefit the black community and bring them out of poverty. Well, I was a Democrat. I grew up in a Democratic household. Like a lot of immigrants, I came from an Irish background, and they were waiting at the docks to hand us the voting cards and vote Democrat. But I came up to Rochester in the 1970s, and I was working in Midtown in one of the stores in the plaza. And all of a sudden, I started to see what the Great Society programs were doing. For one thing, I was hearing conversations like, I'm making more money, I'd be making more money collecting welfare versus at McCurdy's. Why would I want to work at McCurdy's when I can bring more money sitting on welfare? I heard conversations by many young girls which really troubled me and say, I'm going to get pregnant because I want to bring a check home to mom so we can help out the family. And I started to think, this is not what the Great Society programs was I was led to believe and told. And that's when I started to change and think there's got to be more than what the Democratic Party is offering. And I think that, like Ayesha said, what we need to really do is educate people, because our children are being fed one thing in school and not being told the truth. And I think some of this you probably come across is when you're trying to homeschool your children, like I did at one point in time, when you start looking for books to teach your children American history, and you start looking at what is in the context of these books, and you're seeing what they're projecting. And Lyndon Baines Johnson was probably one of the biggest presidents we had, and he said, I'm going to keep the blacks down. And how we're going to do this is by passing these Great Society programs, because they're going to be voting Democrat for the rest of their lives, because we're going to keep providing for them. And it was really a form of modern-day slavery. It was no different than the plantation owners keeping the slaves down on the plantation.
Hi, my question has to do with segregation. I remember back in the early 60s, everybody was like against segregation down south, and they wanted to integrate the schools, blacks and whites and all that. And then, you know, as I was growing up and stuff, and I was in the Army and I was in college, and it seemed like everybody sort of chose to be segregated to the extent, even in our churches a lot. We don't have a lot of integration, and it seems weird that we would fight so hard for that. It was a Republican platform, I believe, for the most part. And then we see, you know, the history here, you know, where there was integration in the government. blacks and whites, and you know, having church services together in Congress. It would, you know, so you know, I know there's one thing that we've got lots of little things in all of our minds that are there. We need to check, and I think we need to check it with the Scripture. And one thing I've heard is that you're not supposed to talk about religion and politics in groups. You know, they say you shouldn't talk about those things because it gets a little heated, you know. Well, it gets heated when you talk about sports teams and guys that, you know, one guy likes the sports team. The thing is, they look like they're going to beat each other up, but then they go and, you know, they hang out together. So there's certain things in our own minds. I mean, if you think about it, do you think Jesus would have taught, you know, you don't talk about religion and politics? No, but how many of us are Christians, and yet somehow in our own mentality we've allowed some of these thoughts to integrate our mentality that then reflects and manifests in our reality. Wow, that rhymed. But so the point is, I guess it's a reflection, it's a question, but for us to think about it, because, you know, coming in here tonight, I noticed that it's predominantly white in here, and I was actually expecting kind of the opposite. But it's not a reflection of the leadership here, I don't think, but it just was a question of, like, how come that is, you know? And so I guess that's all I'm going to say for now, and I'll leave that question. Integration, segregation, what can we do locally?
Well, one of the things David Barton mentioned was how LBJ slipped into the IRS code that churches cannot speak about politics. And the reason why he did that, because he had tremendous pressure during the time when they tried to push these civil rights bills. It was mostly ministers. And as we saw how Reverend Garnett was the first black American to speak before Congress, even from day one in the founding of this country, it was Christians who fought to eliminate slavery. It was the Christians who taught black slaves how to read. It was Christians like Wilberforce and all these guys. I mean, they really, really pushed hard to eliminate slavery. And one of the reasons why the Democrats hate mixing religion and politics is because they're confronted with their lack of moral standing when it comes to social issues. So if they can use Thomas Jefferson's letter that he wrote to the Danbury Baptist to separate religion and church, he could weaken the institution of Christianity in this country. Now, we're not trying to just take over the country. It's just we believe in the basic Christian concept that God loves everybody and that humans are more valuable than animals and humans should not be called property. So everything that we fought for on the Republican platform from day one, well, from 1854, even from the time of day one founding this country, we believe in the basic Christian principles that God is on our side if we just line up with his word. And the Democrats have been hating that ever since. It was okay when they maintained slavery and go to church and stuff like that, and as long as you're on the plantation, but they didn't believe in equality like the scriptures have proclaimed equality. So even today, you know, when I was in Bible college, I really had to fight with some of my professors about this stuff. And I really went head to head with them. But even today, when if I were to show up at a job interview and with all the credentials in the world, I would still be considered a person who, the only reason why I got that job because I was black. I don't want to be looked at that way. I want to say I have this job because I have the education, I have the experience, and I have the perseverance to do my job to the best of my ability. That's how I want to be looked at. Not having this job because of affirmative action and quotas, and that's how Democrats are looking at most of us. They say, you can't do it on your own, you need extra points on your civil service test. Or something, you know, something like that. So it perpetrates racism. So when the Republicans come and say, listen, you have to start off just like everybody else. And if you lose, that means you have to improve. And then they'll turn around and say, you just don't like black people. So it's all kinds of stuff. So we, as a Frederick Douglass Foundation, we're trying to educate people and change the mindset of people within the community, because you're no longer in physical chains, but they're in psychological chains, and we're trying to change that. Yeah. Who's next? Oh, I'm sorry.
And, you know, I know you were speaking about, you know, like, how can we naturally segregate and things like that, but that's, I mean, I think that's normal. You can't, you know, even when I look at the civil rights movement and when it came to segregation and how, I mean, of course, let's be sensitive, I don't know. You have to let people do what they want. And if you want to naturally segregate, that's okay. If I want to only hang out with Christians, I should be able to have the right to only hang out with Christians. If I want to only hang out with, you know, other black folks, I have the right to do that. If you only want to hang out with white folks, only hang out with white folks. If I only want to hang out with women, I should only hang out with women. We do that naturally as human beings, right? Oh, I want my girls' night out. Oh, I want, you know, but because society has so much, or maybe one end of society has put so much emphasis on that whole principle of segregating or desegregating something, you then force people, right? If you're all of a sudden forced, if you have a group of women, you 4 women here, and all of a sudden somebody comes in and says, oh, it's girls' night out, but you know what, you gotta let Tom come. Right?
That's okay.
You have to. Yeah, he might be okay with it, but what are you 4 ladies gonna do? What are you 4 ladies gonna do? You're going to then kind of hold an animosity towards him, right? And you're gonna be like, why are you making him come over here? If I have a business, same thing, right? Yes, morally we sit there and we think to ourselves, you know, if I have a business and I am only going to serve white folks, I'll say, you know, I'll use that one because that's the one that, you know, we're talking black history here. And you're going to force me as a black or as a white business owner that I have to serve blacks. Well, there's going to be some animosity there, right? But what if I'm a white business owner and I decide I'm not going to serve blacks, and all you people out there decide, you know, I'm not going to, you know, John Smith's place anymore. He won't serve blacks. I bet you John Smith, when he starts getting hit in the pocket, he's going to stop. And he's going to say, you know what, I think I better start serving blacks so I get my other customers back. That is what free enterprise is. You know, that is what it means to live, you know, for that free market society. We don't have that. You saw something where we were trying to balance the scales and it was admirable, but in a way it didn't work because it went a little too far. Not much too far, just a little bit. Because, you know, you have to have, you know, there had to be some equality. There was a lot of animosity there, but you have to give way for human nature to say, you know what, hey, I want, you know, you can do it with daycare, you know, hey, I'm only gonna be a daycare where I serve, you know, 0 to 12 months old, but that's okay, you know, right? Or Hooters or whatever, you know what I mean? That's, no, you know what I mean? But there's lawsuits against those places, but that's that business owner's right. You know what I mean? If you put your money into it and that's what you want to do, you should be able to do that. So when it comes to segregation, we have to look at it in a very open view. And when you look at, I guess, when I first started the Frederick Douglass Foundation and became president of the Frederick Douglass Foundation, I did find you do see a lot more whites that are on board. But that's been that way since the beginning, as we see that from this history. It is those few people that go and sow the seed into something to change the climate and to change everything. And you say, you know what? I mean, we see, you know, as I'm networking and we talked, you know, I'm able to talk to different pastors, different organizations, and they're really like, oh, hungry, and they're like, oh, that sounds great. But there's still this little bit of fear. As you can know, you know, like from us 3 black conservatives that are up here, it's difficult to be a minority within the minority. Not everyone, we're seeing more and more people coming out now because the climate of our nation is in dire straits and you can't do it anymore. But there also has to be, you know, which is, you know, I mean, like I said, you always see just a little bit more, you know, I called Tim Johnson, he's the founder of the Frederick Douglass Foundation, co-founder. And I told him that, I said, well, there's always all these, you know, white Republicans that want to be involved. Why? You know, and I was a little discouraged. And he said, you know what? God puts in place who he's going to put in place for such a time as this. And it's okay. You know, Frederick Douglass was married to a white woman. You know, so what? And he's like, you know what? If the message gets out, and the footwork gets done, and the mindsets are changed, who cares if you're going to talk about who cares what color they are? Then we have to say, let's not go. And then, of course, the hard work comes in. And we see, there's more and more people, I guess, that I engage with. And hopefully, the next time around, more and more people will come. And they'll be able to break out of that little segment of bondage a little bit more to say, you know what, I'm going to do it. Because it can be a very difficult place within your family and everything. And there was something else I was going to say, but I talked so much that I forgot. And I know, she wanted to talk.
Sam, you had a question, right?
Sure.
You had a question a while ago.
I'm going to tell you why this white woman's up here. I remember the 1960s. I remember Martin Luther King. And I raised 2 sons, and I raised them in the philosophy of you judge a person by their character, not the color of the skin. And in the last 2 years, I've seen a vast shift in our country today. I've seen people beginning to be more racist, more hateful, and I see my sons coming home and they're telling me they have to go to diversity training and for their RA jobs, and there's people up there telling them that they should be